Pelicans don't make it easy, do they, as they come back from nearly 20 down again to beat the San Antonio Spurs. Despite the win, there's one thing they absolutely need to fix for next season, and I'll tell you what that is in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with you on this Wednesday, day after the Pelicans beat the San Antonio Spurs 109-103, coming back down from nearly 20 points again to get the victory. Look, if you got a game plan, you may as well execute it in back-to-back games, though I wouldn't recommend that. I want to break down how the Pelicans came back in this one, why there was a lot of luck involved in it, and look at a bigger issue here that's been the case all season long, that if this team doesn't figure out, they're not going to do anything next year, and I'll let you know what that is in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. We're going to look at Brandon Boston Jr. It's being reported now that he's signing a 2-year deal. It's not quite 2 years. I'll explain what I mean. And then, now that they won back-to-back games, is the tank broken? Are we concerned about that? We're going to break it all down in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. All right, let's get into this one. Beating the San Antonio Spurs again, 109-103. Pelicans down as many as 19 in this game. I think it was 17 on Sunday before coming back, storming back really in the second half, really the second quarter here, and then the fourth quarter as well is when they pulled away from this team or got back into it, then kind of pulled away a little bit. There are a couple of things that you saw in this game that really worked out in New Orleans' advantage, right? Like, here's how they made this comeback. They outscored them, again, in points in the paint, 66-44. That's something they've done a very good job of here. They limited them enough on the glass to keep it at least even. San Antonio had 23 second chance points compared to the Pelicans, just 16. But New Orleans was rebounding better than we'd seen from them as well. And they were like oddly wasteful when it came to second chance points. They had 7 more offensive boards than the San Antonio Spurs, and just struggled to score, particularly in the beginning part of the game. But Kelly Olynyk starting again, 12 rebounds for him. Yves Missi, 11 for him. That's going to get it done when you have your front court, because Zion's basically playing the 3 now. When your front court can rebound like that and give you that kind of size, the Pelicans can do okay things because they're not getting mauled on the offensive glass like they had been all season long. And then in the second half, the San Antonio Spurs just went cold. They really did not do a whole lot of anything in the second half of this game, failing to really get any sort of bucket in offense, especially in the fourth quarter where they scored just 20 points. But their shooting, particularly in the second half, not particularly good. They were 6 of 21 from 3. Pelicans weren't much better, but they were at least getting the ball down low, scoring, getting fouled, and going to the line, which is not what the San Antonio Spurs were doing at all. So here's the thing with this, though. When you watch them, particularly that first quarter where they got rocked and got pushed down immediately, 30-16 in that first period, this is where we look at this team with Zion, with Trey, with CJ. Those are 3 really good offensive players, in my opinion. And you look at them and you go, okay, this isn't a team that's going to win with just pure offense. They need to have enough offense, but they can be streaky at times. You double Zion, that can be a bit of a problem. If Trey's missing, and he was missing in the first quarter, this one, he went 0 for 5, that's going to be a problem. CJ was 1 of 4. When CJ, Trey, and Zion combine for 2 made buckets between them, when they combine to go 2 for 11 from the field, not good. That's not going to work here. CJ at least got to the line twice, but when those 3 players combined for 6 points in a quarter, you have problems. And now maybe a better offense, better designed offense, I should say, can get them going a little bit more. But we've seen this enough that, especially shooters can be a little bit streaky at times. Not always, but at times. So you need to do it with defense. You need to get out there and you need to limit opportunities for your opponent. But here's the thing with that. The Pelicans just haven't been doing that all season long. Their defense has been bad. It is the 28th out of 30th ranked defense this season. They need to get that defense back on track. If you know that CJ could be streaky, Trey could be streaky, and streaky is used probably is a bit of an exaggeration. I would not call either player particularly like streaky like that. They're consistently good. The averages show that. But they're not guys that are like, yeah, we live at the rim like Zion does, where you're like, cool, they're going to go and get theirs because that's what happens. When it comes to shooting, every now and then that abandons you a little bit. You need to be able to get it done on defense, and that is a problem that the Pelicans have been having all season long. Their defense has fallen off a cliff compared to previous years. Last year, the past 2 years, the way this defense has worked is, hey, we don't let you get inside the paint. You might shoot a bunch of threes against us, but we don't let you get inside the paint, and we contain the point of attack. That has completely been gone this season. A lot of that has to do with the Herb Jones injury and other things, but they're now allowing teams to dribble drive, get into the paint, and either they let them score there because they don't have rim protection. Misi is not a rim protector. Carlo and Olynyk are not rim protectors, right? Zion's not a rim protector. They score at the rim. In the past 2 years when teams did get into the paint, which was very rare, they basically scored at the highest rate in the league. So the Pelicans were just like, we won't let you in there and we'll mitigate it that way. It's a smart move. It works. So this year, though, they still let teams score at a very high rate in the paint, but now they let them get into the paint even more than they did. And if they do manage to take away the rim, now that they got beat on the perimeter, they're in rotation defense, scramble defense, whatever you want to call it. And all of a sudden now teams are kicking the ball out. You go over to cover the guy in the corner who just got the ball. It means they then pass to the next guy. You manage to recover and defend that guy. You pass to the next one, and you're eventually going to give up an open three-point look. And that's what happened in the first quarter here. The San Antonio Spurs were 5 of 13 from three. That's 39%. The Pelicans were 0 for 8. You're going to fall down and lose games when that's the case. And it took the San Antonio Spurs basically being like ice cold the remainder of the game from three for the Pelicans really to kind of be in this one and pull out the victory if we wanted them to even do that. More on that in the third part of today's show. They need to get this defense back on track next season. They have to. I think we've seen that, look, no matter who the coach is, if you're relying on some guys to just shoot out of it, which they do, and they often do it. Look, Trey did. He got it going later in this game. You better also have the defense too. Otherwise, you might end up with a 30-16 first quarter where your defense is bad and your offense is bad too. You at least need one of those two things to be consistent. I feel, given what we've seen from this team in the past, the more consistent of all of those things is going to be the defensive side of the ball. I think it stops, get out in transition and run, score easy buckets that way. They need to get the defense fixed is what I'm trying to say here. It's been really bad all season long. They need to get this fixed because next year there's still going to be a work in progress on offense, even if there's a new head coach running a completely new offense, I think. And defense, at least you can rely on night in, night out. You don't need to learn a new scheme, necessarily develop some chemistry there. Just go and defend at a high level. Pelicans have not done that this season. That's been the biggest thing for me. And it really is it starts with their defense on the perimeter and the lack of perimeter contain on guards and other guys driving and attacking. It's been really disappointing to see all season long. And that's one of the biggest reasons the Pelicans find themselves with only 15 losses and guaranteed a losing record this season. 15 wins and guaranteed a losing record this season. So coming up next, broke during the game. Pels were busy, huh? That Brandon Boston Jr. is going to sign a 2-year deal, getting elevated from a 2-way contract. I'll explain what the Pelicans are doing and what they're probably going to do with him this offseason and going forward. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive, and with Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%. Plus, you also get 4% APY on your cash in non-retirement accounts. That's over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is here tier with Robinhood Gold to receive your 3% boost on annual IRA contributions. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rates subject to change. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 a month for 1 year from first match. Must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Go to Robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times National's average savings account interest rate claim is based on data from the FDIC as of November 18th, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And don't forget about the free daily Locked On Pelicans newsletter. You could subscribe over at LockedOnDaily.com. It's not just on the coverage on the Pelicans. There's also league coverage there too. Fantasy basketball advice, links to other Pelicans articles. It's really great. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage available over at LockedOnDaily.com. All right. We're gonna go back to this game that the Pelicans beat the San Antonio Spurs 109-103 in the third segment, next segment here. But I want to take a couple minutes to talk about the news that broke during the game from Shams Charania that Brandon Boston Jr. is getting converted from a two-way contract to a standard NBA deal. So Brandon Boston Jr. is getting converted to a standard 2-year NBA contract. Clutch Sports CEO Rich Paul and agent Brandon Kavanaugh told ESPN Boston has had a strong fourth NBA season, averaging 10.7 points after joining the Pelicans on October 21. I've been telling you this was coming. Everyone knew that this has been coming for a minute here. This team has been pretty happy, as I kick my table here, with Brandon Boston Jr. so far this season. He's out injured with an ankle injury right now, but this was always going to be expected from the guard here. They've liked him. And in a season where there have been very few and far between bright spots, Brandon Boston Jr. has at times been one of them. He's kind of come down to earth a little bit since having, a couple of 20-point games in his first couple of games for the Pelicans, first couple of starts for the Pelicans back in early November. But overall, as a guy that can contribute off the bench and be like a scorer off the bench, he's been good. And so signing him to what's going to end up being a veteran minimum deal is, I think, pretty good business for New Orleans. And they can do this now because of the trade with Brandon Ingram and Daniel Tice that ducked them under the luxury tax where, when you sign these guys to these type of deals late in the season, they are prorated. So his full salary this year, which would be whatever it is, won't count fully against the luxury tax, the salary cap, all of the above there. And you get him without dipping into the luxury tax. The Pelicans are going to use part of their mid-level exception to do this deal, I would assume. That doesn't really matter here. They just didn't use it this offseason, truthfully. So they have room into it to do this. So what this means when he says 2-year deal is the remainder of this year and next year too. So it's not like 2 more seasons after this one. It's the remainder of this season and next year. Next year is likely going to be on an unguaranteed deal where you can just cut him and the money doesn't count against the salary cap or anything like that. You could also use that to waive him and then re-sign him to another deal should you want to as well. So all of those things are possible for New Orleans. I don't know if they'll end up doing any of that, or maybe if they end up making a bunch of moves this offseason to retool the roster or something, and all of a sudden you're like, we don't need this guy. You can just waive him. You get him off the books. And that's that. And their books are still not going to be particularly great next year, too. They're going to need to clean those up still as well. So this was expected. What his role going forward is going to be, he's going to get a lot more playing time when he comes back from this ankle injury, I think. He hasn't played for the past 5-6 games or so now. But I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up, getting a spot start here and there in some of those games that Zion Williamson doesn't end up playing. And they have a back-to-back coming up against the Phoenix Suns. So, that's going to end up happening real soon here since he won't be playing in at least one of those games. They've got Phoenix on, Friday, I want to say. Thursday and Friday is when they play. Zion will only play in one of those games. If Brandon Boston Jr. is good to go, he might end up getting the start. But this is someone who should be seeing 25 to 30 minutes per game going forward the rest of the way. See what you really have in him. again, he's kind of like a scorer. He's got good size at 6'7". They were having him play point guard a little bit early on in the year, but he's much more of a 2-guard, a scoring guard in that mold. Can he be a gunner off the bench, a guy that you're like, we need a bucket with the second unit? Can he go and do that? Quite possibly. This season, per 36 minutes, he's averaging almost 16 points per game. He's shooting over 5 threes per game too, even if he's not like an elite or good 3-point shooter. The volume is there from it. He's giving you a couple of boards. The defense is not particularly great, but with that size, he has the tools to be able to do that. Look, for a guy on a veteran minimum deal, I think it's a pretty smart move. You'd like to see him change his shot profile a little bit. This is someone who also loves the mid-range type of shot, and I don't particularly love that. 17% of his shot attempts come from 10 to 16 feet. Almost 12% come from 16 feet to the 3-point line. I think those numbers, you'd like it to be more at the rim, more from 3 to 10 feet, which it's not, where that's about 11% of his shot profile here. If he can kind of get a little bit closer to the basket or shoot more threes, whichever one it's going to be, that is what you really would like to see from him, and you'd feel much better about like him really carving out a role going forward. Otherwise, his game does remind you a good bit of Brandon Ingram, just not as good as Brandon Ingram. But we didn't want Brandon Ingram to have that same sort of shot profile. Now, making $2 million a year versus, the 40 to 52 that he wanted is an entirely different story. And you can live with it with the second unit a little bit, but something to keep in mind as we look at him and him kind of carving out a role in the NBA, that I do think could potentially be a little bit of a concern with him. But when this team is healthy and hopefully competitive next year, if they figure out the defense like we just talked about, you worry less about that because just the role isn't nearly as outsized as it would be for, somebody else here. So this is smart, right? You could include him in a trade should another team be interested in him at this point. And with the way two-way contracts work is you're really only allowed a certain amount of games in the NBA, with the NBA parent club. Let me see what the limits are. I can't remember here for the NBA. Two-way limits NBA. 45 days total. From 45 days to 50 games. So he has played in 42 games for the team this season. So you obviously were going to kind of run into this, and that's what you needed. So converting him from that two-way onto this now makes a ton of sense. It's a good way to reward him too. And the Pelicans have done a very good job with their two-way contracts over the past couple of seasons. Jose Alvarado being a very big success with that. Before that, Najee Marshall was a massive success. So was Kenrich Williams with some of these, with the team as well. They've done Jeremiah Robinson Earl was signed on a two-way last season. They've done a very good job of managing the two-way contracts and kind of finding some diamonds in the rough with these guys who end up being cheap contributors to the team in the long run. They did this exact same kind of deal with Jose Alvarado a couple of years ago as well. So I like how they've been doing this. This is something that this regime, for all the flaws that they've had, this is something they've consistently done pretty well about. So what do you think about them signing Brandon Boston Jr.? Let me know in the comments down below. So coming up next, 15 wins? Back-to-back wins? Where are the Pelicans in the tanking standings? Is this a problem? Let's talk about that. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. And it's simple. When any player scores 50 or more in an NBA game in the 2024-2025 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order, up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. So late night cravings, whether you're staying up late, up watching highlights, or you just need a midnight snack, use Dash Pass to grab something delicious while saving big. If you need lunch On the go the next day with Dash Pass, you can get your favorite meals with $0 delivery fees and reduced service fees. Plus, you now save even more with this exclusive NBA offer. So sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast for a reason here. And as I said, becoming every day. That means you listen Monday through Friday. And for your second listen, Ross Jackson is at the end of the NBA, the NFL Combine in Indianapolis, boots on the ground, covering everything you want to know about that. He's going to be talking to the coaches, give you updates from everything. Go make Locked On Saints your second listen today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's wrap up talking about tanking. The Pelicans have won 2 in a row right now. Is the tank off? I promise you, the tank is not off. And the fact that the Pelicans got past these 2 games here against San Antonio. San Antonio, by the way, stinks right now. They completely stink right now post Wembanyama injury. They look completely lost, losing 2 games to New Orleans. It's not a good look for them. They're not going to be going anywhere anytime soon, but I'm not really worried about them when it comes to tanking or anything like that. They have 9 more wins than the Pelicans do right now. It's tough to make up that kind of difference when it comes to it. New Orleans going forward after this game is going to have still a top 10 strength of schedule remaining. That is an important thing to keep in mind too. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for losses. You have this back-to-back set against the Phoenix Suns, who are desperate. Then you're on the road at Utah, which has been a tough place to play for New Orleans. But then the Lakers, that's a loss. Houston's probably a loss. Another game against Houston's a loss. Memphis, right? The Clippers. When we start looking at this, Orlando, where's their next win going to be? Is it going to be the March 15th game at the Spurs? Maybe, but then they're at home and they're going to want some revenge. And all of a sudden you can see, maybe a 10-game losing streak coming up, which is weird that I sound oddly excited about that. But it is important to still lose games. One of the things that I really want to remind people of, just because your odds for the #1 overall pick are basically the same in 1, 2, and 3, and 4 in here. Right now, New Orleans is a 48.1% chance at a top 4 pick, 12.5% for the first overall pick. They're now 4th in the lottery standings. Washington, Utah, and Charlotte are all worse than them currently, and New Orleans sits alone with a cushion in the 4th spot from the Toronto Raptors, who have 18 wins right now. So New Orleans still has a buffer there. But that in that 14% for #1 overall, not much different than 12.5. That's a 1.5% difference. But here's the thing. Should disaster strike and some of those teams behind you jump up, you can fall 4 spots. So New Orleans right now could have the 4th pick, the 5th pick, the 6th, the 7th, or the 8th pick. I don't like that range. The 8th pick in this draft doesn't excite me, right? That doesn't excite me. You're looking at Noah Asengwa, Jeremiah Fears, Derek Queen, Asa Newell in that kind of area, Con Knipple. Those aren't the guys that I'm particularly excited about. That's not Cooper Flagg. That's not Dylan Harper. That's not Ace Bailey. That's not even VJ Edgecombe. You want to be in the top 3 is what I would probably say of this draft. And now they're sitting outside that with even more potential to fall. And that's what gets kind of scary here. 4 teams behind them likely aren't going to be jumping up. But at the same point, do you want to drop to 6? That just be 2 teams jumping up. Still tough to do. The odds don't really say that can happen. But you've got to be careful about winning too much. I think San Antonio is just in a bit of a tailspin right now. Post Victor Wembanyama news and injury there, and New Orleans will end up losing more games here, so I don't think we need to worry about this. I also think you'll see New Orleans start to shut some guys down the final week of the season, which get add a couple more losses than you might not have otherwise. So overall, I'm not too concerned. And every now and then, particularly at home, right, it is nice to remind the fans what this team can do. Winning is still fun. You could feel it in both of these games with the crowd in the Smoothie King Center. People want to win. And the Pelicans just went out and they did that. There will be times when we're like, don't lose to these teams. Don't beat these teams. Definitely lose to them. But it's okay to get a win here and there. We don't want to end the season on a 20-game losing streak. That would straight up be depressing, and no one wants to do something like that. So don't get too upset over a win here, a win there. And if anything, it's good to see these victories over a team like the San Antonio Spurs, because that's a team that's in their division. That's a team that, maybe has deeper flaws than we thought. Maybe Victor Wembanyama was papering over some of those, and we thought they were going to be better than they actually were. And look, Wemby is an incredible player, so there's some truth to that. And maybe you want them to feel they're further away than they are, to not be as competitive next year when the Pelicans are going to try and be as competitive as possible next year, assuming they figure out the defense, which is what we talked about in the beginning part of today's episode. So I don't think the tank is busted. I think these are just 2 wins against a team that is completely lost right now, that New Orleans matches up particularly well against too. I think that's worth keeping in mind when it comes to the San Antonio Spurs here. They're giving up points in the paint right now when they don't have Victor Wembanyama playing. And New Orleans with Zion is in a prime position to take advantage of that, even if they get off shooting from some of the other guys. So that really, I think, helps things here. San Antonio also isn't a good offensive rebounding team for the most part. So New Orleans can come in and look competent on the defensive glass when that has been a problem for them all season long. I think the Spurs, at least without Wemby, are a very good matchup for the Pelicans, and it's less so the Pelicans are going to win all of these games or anything. This is just a fortunate 2-game stretch here, and I don't think New Orleans is like getting out of the tailspin that they're overall in for this season. Are you worried about the wins or are you not? Let me know in the comments down below. I still think they're going to be in a very good spot to land a top 3 pick because, that should be the goal going forward. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Happy Mardi Gras to y'all. I'm going to be at the parades the next couple nights, too. It's going to be a lot of fun, but we're still going to have shows here. I want to look at a lot of Zion Williamson in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. We got a whole lot to cover this week here. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow to talk more Zion.